With the apparent success of the recently released Detective Pikachu movie, and the live-action Sonic the Hedgehog film coming later this year, I decided now was a good time to talk about an artistic concept that not too many people seem to be discussing at length. So with that, let me be the first to introduce you all to a little principle I call the aesthetic-narrative ratio. You want to know why a movie like Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a timeless, iconic classic cherished by many, while a movie like 2017's Woody Woodpecker is an abysmal disaster of filmmaking? To put it simply, the aesthetic complements the narrative. The story of Who Framed Roger Rabbit takes place in a reality where ordinary human beings coexist alongside cartoon characters. It is a world where fantasy and reality mix and mingle. A place where you can walk down the street or go to the store and see your favorite cartoon stars waltzing down the boulevard as if it was just business as usual. This magical reality is what the narrative introduces us to, and it is further cemented by the visual aesthetic that makes it seem as though the cartoons we love have leapt off the page into the everyday world. The story tells us this is a world where toons and people coexist, and the visual aesthetic shows us that this is a world where toons and people coexist. As such, the aesthetic complements the narrative, and vice versa. On the flip side of this equation, we have movies like live-action Scooby-Doo, live-action Garfield, live-action Yogi Bear, and live-action Woody Woodpecker that try to tell a story that does not fit with the visuals we are shown on screen. All four of these movies are set in the real world, much like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but unlike Roger Rabbit, these stories do not do much, or anything at all, to explain away the phantasmal appearance and characteristics of the titular characters. You cannot set a story in the real world, cast real people to play the human cast, but then have some horrific CGI abomination running around as if it were not some bizarre Lovecraftian horror from another plane of existence. Not only do Scooby, Garfield, Yogi, and Woody look fake and unearthly, but they are also ugly as Satan's butthole, due to the simple fact that what looks good in a cartoon does not necessarily look as pleasing when brought to the mundane light of reality. And of course, all of this is made worse by the characters in the movies clearly not reacting to the bizarre appearance of the main leads. Instead, pretending as if there's nothing out of the ordinary, despite the aesthetic clearly saying otherwise.
Someone's wrecking my dream. I'm taking him without any clue. We were singing along, so peaceful and surreal. Suddenly something went wrong.
To reiterate it very simply, Scooby-Doo does not look like a real dog, so you cannot have the characters pretend like he is. Garfield does not look like a real cat, so you cannot pretend like he is. Yogi looks nothing like a real bear, so it's completely asinine to expect the audience to just accept that he's supposed to be one. And don't even get me started on Woody. In all of these films, the aesthetic does not complement the narrative, because the plot of the film is telling us one thing, while the visuals on screen are telling another. We're expected to accept that the stories are taking place in the real world, and that the titular characters are meant to be real things in our real world. But they look absolutely nothing like real things in the real world. They don't look like the animals they're supposed to be, and they don't even look like they belong in our plane of existence. Using CGI to render them with realistic textures does not detract from their otherworldly appearance, and as such, instantly kills any chance for suspension of disbelief, destroying the movie's plot right out of the gate. To give further contrast, let's look at other films like Space Jam, 1995's Casper, and even Looney Tunes back in action in The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. Just like with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, in these films, the aesthetic complements the narrative. In Space Jam and Rocky and Bullwinkle, the Toon characters are shown to be from an entirely different dimension, connected to but still separate from Earth. This explains why they look the way they do and how they're able to be in our reality despite being fictitious. With Casper the Friendly Ghost, Casper and his uncles are ghosts. Supernatural beings whose true nature could be considered nebulous at best. Because of this, the narrative and the aesthetic complement one another simply upon the virtue of that fact alone. And lastly, Looney Tunes back in action, much like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, seems to also take place in a reality where cartoons and real people coexist as though it were an everyday occurrence. In fact, it could even be argued that the two movies are actually set in the same universe. Or at least that's my own personal headcanon. That brings us to the topic of the recently released Detective Pikachu. Now, while I haven't actually seen this movie in its entirety, the little bit I have seen, along with what I've both heard and read, is enough for me to see that this is the latest in the rare case of live-action animated cartoon adaptations wherein the aesthetic and the narrative actually work together to complement one another. In fact, the film seems to be aided by the same elements that made Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Casper work. Reminiscent of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the movie is set in an alternate reality, the Pokemon universe. A world not too dissimilar from our own, just with a bunch of weird alien-like creatures running around. And just like with Casper, it's because these bizarre, unearthly creatures have no real-world counterparts that their unusual alien appearance essentially explains itself. It also helps greatly that the characters' cartoonish features and proportions have been kept largely intact from the cartoon. I'm still not a fan of using CGI to make realistic cartoon hybrids, and I certainly would have preferred a fully animated movie, but under the circumstances, I'm willing to give this one a pass. After all, it could have been so much worse. That all having been said, I must confess that I really didn't want this movie to be successful. The reason being because the stupid suits who run Hollywood are a bunch of dumb shits with tapioca for brains. They're not going to stop and analyze the reasons why this movie did well. They're just going to look at the fact that this was a successful live-action movie based on a video game and a cartoon, and they're going to feel encouraged to make even more live-action films based on video games and cartoons, without even stopping to ask themselves if it's legitimately a good idea. Just because Detective Pikachu did well doesn't mean that live-action versions of cartoons and video games is a sound investment. Right now, I just find myself dreading what will come next. Live-action Rayman? Live-action Earthworm Jim? Will they try again for a live-action Super Mario Brothers? Maybe live-action Spyro the Dragon or Crash Bandicoot? Live-action Conker's Bad Fur Day? How about live-action DuckTales or live-action Simpsons even? I can't wait for them to make the sequel to live-action Yogi Bear, where live-action Yogi meets live-action Huckleberry Hound, live-action Snagglepuss, and live-action Quick Draw McGraw.
Hooray!
And dare I dread to think that they might commit the ultimate sin. Oh, live-action Sonic the Hedgehog. You are the last hope for the dignity of animation. For the love of Tex Avery, you must suck. You must suck like you never sucked before.
Mr. Picasso, you go so far so you can't see. And Matisse, you try to please, but you just tease. When all a girlie really needs is squash and stretch to make a bunny funny, yes sirree. Squash and stretch. Add some silly syncopation, animated motivation. That's the key to jubilation for me. Check this out. Mr. Donatello, you're quite a fellow, guaranteed. Mona Lisa, what a piece of Florentine. Satirical, maybe lyrical, a captivating scene. Till you see a comic funny as the ones that star Bugs Bunny. You can keep your paint and brush strokes, that is simply not for us folks. If you take your cue and follow me.
Use some squash and stretch and sing off key.
Squash and stretch and ink and paint. Do a sketch, you'll be a saint. What's up, Doc, and something funny? Animate and you'll make money. Believe you me, if you stay static, you'll be starving in an attic. Throw away your brush and palette. Get yourself an Acme mallet. You can count on this, God's guarantee.